I'm John Cobb from the Oak Ridge National Lab, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the DataOne project team, really looking sort of the data parts of these issues, less on the particular science or drought issues. So I'd like to begin with sort of acknowledging the team. It's actually a NSF-funded project, but it has a broad scope, international and cross-agency, but primarily U.S. and NSF. And the team is fairly large. Bill Michener out of New Mexico is the PI. In addition, I'll be speaking a little bit about the scientific experimentation, visualization, and analysis working group activity, which has included a significant contribution from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, including Dan Fink, Teo D'Amalu, and Drew Dolgart, as well as Steve Kelly and myself. Some URLs are available and should be available later to see. Names are easy, faces are better. So that's our all-hands meeting last fall. And I guess sort of as a prefatory, I was trying to motivate what we're trying to do, but the previous session did this better than I could ever hope to. Professor Singh's notion of talking about the coupled challenges of energy, water, and environment, I think were excellently showcased. And that's really where DataOne is coming from, not just for drought, but for all these coupled problems of biology, ecology, and environmental sciences. But in addition, when you look at these particular endeavors, you find that the scientific advancement depends on the digital data and on the data being available for examination and reducibility. You see a lot of scientific disciplines that you write the paper, you publish the paper, and then that's your currency of exchange. But in fact, that really doesn't support the scientific method today, in that the availability of the data for retrievability, for reuse later, is really crucial for scholarly exchange. It's also crucial if you want to build upon it, reuse data, do synthesis in different areas than was originally intended. You really need digital data repositories. And so you must have the data as deposition, discovery, knowledge generation, and long-term. And these are difficult challenges. If I'm sitting in my office and my boss comes in and he says, "What are you doing?" and I say, "Well, this great result that I have, I'm writing up the paper, I'm going to publish it." He says, "Good job." If he comes in and he says, "What are you doing?" and I say, "Well, I'm curating my data." He says, "Well, get to work. What are you doing?" And that needs to change, and it may be a generational thing. I think it's actually kind of gratifying to be at a place like this where I think I'm speaking more to the choir. Sometimes these concepts are new or not internalized, and I think actually this workshop is very nice in that it begins with the premise that these types of endeavors are critical to addressing science problems. So I'm really happy to be here. Let me tell you where we're trying to go, and I'm sorry I've a little over-prepared, so I'll be going a little fast, and I may end up skipping some areas, but my apologies. But talk a little bit about the science focus areas, talk a little bit about some of the data preservation issues that we've identified. I think they're not unique, but to sort of highlight them. And then talk about the technical architecture that we've tried to implement with DataOne, including community engagement subsequently. Let's talk a little bit about sustainability, which is a mission, and then progress. And one particular case study that we've been working with was the eBird activity, as well as a particular technology that is an example of some things that we might be doing. So DataOne is a DataNet award out of NSF, and that was a program that was competed a couple of years ago. In bold, it doesn't show up a lot here, but it seeks to emphasize digital data preservation, interoperability, full lifecycle management, and sustainability for decades-long data stewardship. Additionally, they were planning for 5 awards with a 5-year duration, an option of a 5-year follow-on that would peter out, with the stated goal that at the end of 10 years, the project should lift up and fly on its own and continue indefinitely without further direct explicit support. 2 awards were made, DataOne and the Data Conservancy at Johns Hopkins. There was a second competition, and some additional awards may be made out of that. And we had a critical review a few months ago, and we're very happy that it went very well. Trying to make the case that once you end up on the cover of Time or the New Yorker. It must be something that society in general cares about. I think Professor Singh made this case even better, that these sorts of issues are critical, are timely, and need to be addressed in a comprehensive manner. Perhaps a little more interesting is sort of highlighting particular questions where this type of information can be very helpful. You know, salinity valves, we've already talked about this a lot this morning. For example, just to take one example, deforestation. And so in fact you can gather data that provides a basis for analysis of where deforestation is occurring, how that affects the human ecosystems, how humans re-affect this. It's a coupled system. And so in fact a particular diagram that I've liked a lot from the Millennial Ecosystem Assessment talks about the different sort of constituents of this sort of systems analysis perspective of where humans interact, where the ecosystem responds, feedbacking back and forth, where you have an ability to have a lot of influence or very little influence, coupled, decoupled, nearly decoupled environments. And just sort of highlighting that this is really a very interconnected problem. It spans from science to social science, from environmental science to social science. And in fact, I think this is a very interesting group in that I usually have to make the case that part of the analysis of this problem is the social part of it, how human systems respond. But I think we've already seen a lot of that this morning. So for the DataOne project that was assembled, in fact, here's a picture from last winter's DataOne users group meeting. They're getting larger so that you can't hardly see individual people. So we think that's nice. We spent some time defining what we call our vision statement, and it's enabling universal access to data about life on Earth and the environment that sustains it. And we spent a lot of time parsing it, so I'll spend a couple of minutes doing it. The key phrase here is data, right? We're talking about the data itself, and we're not trying to generate data. We don't have a project to actually create data, but what we're trying to do is enable the access of the data. And in particular, you see a lot of different existing data archives, and the interoperability among them is actually what's a challenge. Being able to access the South African environmental network if you're on the long-term ecological research network. What unique information does it add? And so in fact, it's the universal access to the data that we're very interested in. And the focus area, the science and engineering focus area, is life on the Earth and the environment that sustains it. So we try to be interdisciplinary. We're probably a little bit larger in the Venn diagram than just drought. There's some intersection there, of course. But there are things that we don't have in our scope. We're not helping to analyze Hubble data. That's an interesting problem. It's just not what we've taken on. And really what we want to be able to change is the fact that when you begin to look at and read journals, you see journals published with direct reference to their deposited data. And in fact, what we'd also like to see is in the reference. Reference 14 would be a DOI. And so in fact, we would now begin to cite digital data archives in the same way that we cite prior publications, and for the same reason, for attribution as well as for source of information. So when we looked initially starting with the team, we had several groups that we've worked with, but these are sort of 6 that we picked out here. You'll notice that you have things that are based at universities, cross agencies. You even have some things that have a fairly international component, things associated with journal publications, and things that are associated with sort of traditional data archives. So that's kind of the area where we're going. What are the challenges that we're looking to sort of face and address? Well, there's a lot of challenges, and I'll try to mention just a few. One is that the data sources are diverse, right? It spans everything from well-curated data like MODIS that we've seen to the disk drives that are sitting in the individual researcher's drawer that still has vital information, and we want to try to retain it. It's scattered. It's scattered by the method that it's collected, and it's scattered geographically. You have hundreds of thousands of scientists, you have hundreds of agencies, hundreds of museums, hundreds to thousands of university libraries, and you need to try to sort of integrate this. So in this sense, I think DataOne is somewhat unique. When we began, we explicitly said, look, we're not going to do what a lot of people do, which is we're going to give you the data center to end all data centers that it becomes an accretion point for all your data. One, that doesn't work because for control issues, and two, it's not really a technologically sustainable point of view. Even deeper than that, there's a problem that you come up on, which is for interoperability, it's very difficult. So here, for example, there are two studies that are attempting to do in different geographic regions to take an inventory of species density. And so there's, the studies, actually you look at them as you want to integrate them, and you have challenges from things that are mundane, different formats for dates, to things that get kind of difficult. So if you'll notice, you've actually structured these two studies differently. One has a record that indicates the species, and the other one assumes, has a field to indicate the species. The other one assumes every record records both species. So in fact, in the layout and the schema that you have for collecting the data, you have a regularization that you need to do in the integration of the data that is fairly subtle, and actually this is a common mistake that you'll find, or a common occurrence. I wouldn't call it a mistake. And then you have semantic problems. So for instance, in this study, you're counting a count and you give an area, whereas here, the counts are given per square meter. And so in fact, you have to understand that these two numbers are distinguished in that manner before you correlate them. This is from a paper by Matt Jones a few years ago. And this is an easy problem, right? You're studying, these are two studies doing the exact same thing. Now what if I want to study in interdisciplinary regions? I have a real data regularization problem. Now I can't simply define an ordered data product and expect everybody to adhere to it, because again, we're talking about interoperability. And so in fact, we see this as a huge data challenge. We look at our sort of the initial set of data archives we were working with and the areas that they focus on. And in fact, we're in a good situation. They have a well use of metadata, but in fact, we find not less than 8 different metadata standards for those 6 archives. So this is a tough problem. We also see issues with poor data practice. When I publish the paper, I have access to my data immediately. Over time, I misplace it. When I retire, a lot of it gets misplaced. If I have a disk drive that dies, it's even worse. Bill Michener likes to quote this particular study where he looks at the longevity of data, and I think the thing to bring from it is that a well-formed digital library object can have a lifetime of a quarter century, which is significantly larger than you see for many other sort of data products. And I think that's sort of the hope. I get nervous when Bill does this because he's kind of laying a marker out there that you need to achieve. So let me talk a little bit about the architecture that we've tried to approach with DataOne. And let's see if I can get the animation to work.
How does a scientist use DataOne to preserve research data? Scientists collect data using many different methods. The collected data is often referred to as a dataset. Spreadsheets or database software are used to store the collected data and enable analysis or transformation of data. Metadata helps people find, understand, and reuse a dataset. A scientist deposits data by visiting a data repository that participates in DataOne as a member node. The scientist connects to a member node repository using one of several familiar software tools. The scientist uploads the dataset and metadata to her member node repository. The member node repository confirms the dataset and metadata have been successfully deposited into DataOne. DataOne's central services are performed by coordinating nodes. They contact each member node to find out if any new datasets have been deposited. The member node responds that a new dataset has been deposited there. The metadata for a new dataset is copied to one of the coordinating nodes. The dataset's metadata is copied to all DataOne coordinating nodes. Coordinating nodes then ask some of the other DataOne member nodes to get a copy of the scientific data. Member nodes replicate datasets by interacting directly with each other. The source member node sends a copy of the dataset to each DataOne member node that has requested it. Centralized metadata enables searching. Citizens and scientists can access datasets held at a DataOne member node. Member nodes will soon begin collecting statistics on dataset use. Scientists will be able to find out how many times their datasets have been downloaded and reused. DataOne is designed to be a reliable system for sharing and preserving scientific data. The coordinating nodes poll every DataOne member node to verify its health and stability. Scientists who deposit their data in DataOne can refer others to DataOne without having to search their own computers or labs. By citing DataOne in the papers they write, readers can access data directly from DataOne. DataOne, data, discovery, knowledge, for a sustainable future.
So that voice is actually our Deputy Director for Community Engagement, and I think we're very fortunate to have someone like that, not have to hire a voice artist. The key elements, again, to reiterate there, are we've created essentially a distributed data repository that's actually a collective of a lot of archives. The archives still exist, and access to those archives' front doors still exist, but additional access through DataOne is available. And the idea is member nodes come to DataOne with their data and with the specific metadata of their collections. And the metadata itself is registered with the coordinating nodes. Again, the coordinating nodes only have the metadata and not the data itself. In addition, member nodes can request replication among themselves for resiliency and survivability. And so together, the member nodes and the coordinating nodes present a collective that allow discovery and retrievability for different user toolkit versions. And essentially what you're doing here is accessing a RESTful web service API, and then we have different instantiations here or reference implementations that can be used to access the DataOne as a collective. This was sort of a build in case the movie didn't work. I'll just mention one thing that you see that happens with the different sort of scenarios is in addition to just publishing data, we have the ability to look at well-defined workflows and publish them. So again, when you have multiple types of data, oftentimes you'll want to do a workflow to generate synthetic information. But in fact, you can then actually store the workflows themselves and retrieve them, rerun them, modify them, and restore them, whatever you'd like to do. And so in fact, you begin to have sort of a virtuous feedback loop of this sort of repository. Again, what we're looking at are tools that help us along the entire life cycle. And so you'll see the various components of this architecture, and we've tried to map it, the various projects and sub-projects onto the different parts of the life cycle. And then, of course, in the center, you see your happy scientists and policymakers. They're always smiling. Here's a block diagram. You can see better information at this website, which is our open, actually the software repository itself. It's a little rough right now because we're pre-1.0. And you see the service interfaces the member nodes provide that bridge actually to their own data collections. You see the coordinating node services and the object store they have for the metadata, as well as the access methods from the investigator toolkit. A big part of what we're trying to do as well is what we call community engagement, and that is changing the way that we do data management and data deposition and retrieval in the various communities. And we see this as very important as well. If you have poor data practice, you need to create tools where people can deposit, but you also need to create knowledge and acceptance of that. And so actually, really a very large part of the project is in that effort. You see the various feedback mechanisms. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I'm going too slow. We've actually done a baseline assessment, for example. We were very happy to get 1,300 scientists that responded in our target areas, the academic communities, and we had a lot of results for it. I'll just present two here. This one says that about half of our respondents said they currently don't use any metadata standard, which means there's opportunity, right? We're not plowing a well-plowed field. And in fact, a good majority of them are willing to share their data. So the ability to have this type of project could help change the way that we conduct this business. We've done assessments based on needs of our different stakeholders. We've developed tools that we think are useful. Here's a beta version of a data management plan, particularly for this particular area. We find it fairly useful and have had some interest in it. I think you're beginning to see a lot of other institutions provide something similar at the same time or a little before, a little after, particularly in response to NSF's requirement now of having a data management plan for every proposal. And again, we're trying to catalog some best practices and collect references where you see best practices or examples of good practice. In fact, if you look through here, you'll see one from the Purdue libraries that was very nice. And then a lot of communication mechanisms. One component that we've tried to look at is citizen science. The Cornell folks with eBird were relaying to me that they have a lot of volunteer efforts where they go out and spot birds and note the time, place, and a species. And in fact, that they calculate that they have on the order of 200,000 volunteer hours. And that's a project that they could never fund. And it's scientifically valuable information. I think if we were more, Web 2.0 cool, we'd call this crowdsourcing. But I think the phrase citizen science is what's sort of stuck in the world. And sustainability is a big issue. I'm going to skip over most of this, except to say what you really have to do is have a very nimble and lightweight architecture. We spend a lot of time on that. And then you need to find a place for it to be hosted. And we believe in the long term, a very important part of that is going to be university libraries. Universities as an institution have realized the importance of preserving scholarly literature in print form. And we think that's a natural place where you'll see a lot of input for preserving scholarly output in digital form. But we need to look at all the stakeholders, and we've done a lot of stakeholder analysis in depth. And basically what we're trying to do is get a value proposition. Why would you want to do something like DataOne? Why would somebody want to provide some funds to support it? Progress and status. The organization is fully fleshed out. Bill likes to say we have an org chart to support a $200 million project, but we don't have a $200 million. It's divided in sort of two areas, community engagement and sort of CI operations. A core CI set of developers are here. It's a pretty thin team, but they're running real hard. And then a lot of the work ends up being done in specific working groups which convene for intense periods of time to accomplish specific goals. So you see it's a large group, but it's not a large fraction of each of those individuals' time. Project comes from library information science, domain science, and cyber infrastructure. Those are sort of the skill sets we're trying to bring together and overlap for particular parts of the project. And where we're headed is towards a version 1.0 release at the end of this year. We've already implemented a prototype and done an evaluation on it, and the design is pretty much complete as well. The 1.0 release will provide identification of objects with various different like DOIs or GUIDs or out of the Merit project, EasyID. Trying to have federated identity using CI login from NCSA, InCommon and OpenID to provide that. Because across different archives, you're going to have different identities. And we don't want to try to give you a new universal identity. We want to try to use existing ones. And we'll provide the functions to preserve data and metadata for replication requests and metadata replication across the coordinating nodes. And discovery methods. This is showing a mock-up of the Mercury data catalog. That's the same one that's actually used at the DAC to access MODIS data at ORNL. And different investigator toolkit tools in various different formats. This is the schedule again with some metrics. You'll see the notion of how many member nodes we're trying to get over time. This is the first 5 years of the project. How many users and metadata objects and significant goals, including, well, this is mostly just a CI, but there's also a community engagement as well. And at version 1.0, these are the functional parts that we plan to have released. The member node software will be available in different forms. Coordinating nodes services will be up and running, including authentication. The programming interface is defined and will be functional. And these particular investigator toolkit software is what we're hoping to have done. Year 2, we have committed to adding 3 more member nodes. It might be these 3. It's not finalized yet. And it's highly likely we may have some additional member nodes. So we may achieve beyond scope. So that's kind of the whole quick overview. I want to present 2 more things. One is an example. Early on we said we need a science result to sort of test drive the pilot to see how things are working. And so in fact what we did was the Cornell folks have this eBird database, and what they've done is begin to correlate it with a set of covariants, MODIS, remote data sensing, land cover databases, about 15 or 16 different variables. And so they take these observations they have of the presence or absence of a bird at a particular point in time, and they correlate it with these particular variables to train, and its geographically varying model. And from that trained model, they can then retrieve a lot larger number of points, like about 1 million, and develop highly detailed maps that would show the presence or absence of birds over the course of the year. So this is the indigo bunting. You can see it start from a migration to the Gulf Coast, up the Mississippi Valley to breeding regions, and then in the fall migrate back and south across the Gulf. And in fact, you can predict this in a great bit of detail. And if you look at it as it scans through, you'll notice dark splotches where large metropolitan areas are. This particular species of bird actually avoids urban areas. And in fact, what you'll find is that this map is very, very detailed, that bird habitat can change on the order of 100 meters, right? A bird may nest in the park, but not the parking lot. And so in fact, additionally adding huge amounts of information is actually meaningful for this sort of problem. This was done last year with a small grant on some TeraGrid computers. And in fact, it ended up as a basis of a significant fraction of the State of the Bird Report, which was released by Secretary Salazar last month, where the point that they were trying to emphasize this year in the State of the Bird Report was how to use public lands and manage them in order to support different bird populations. So in fact, here you have a synthetic data reuse that would not have been possible unless you tried to do these types of problems that DataOne is trying to help people address. We're going to redo it again this year, 500 species over 5 years. The idea to see a year-to-year variation in order to monitor, how do these bird migrations change with the variability of climate and the variability of weather across the years. A much larger allocation, 3 million core hours, will be used on Lone Star. And in fact, we'll instantiate a member node on the TeraGrid for DataOne and use that to transfer data both to Cornell as well as into the DataOne collective. We'll also mount the wide area file systems that TeraGrid has within the DataOne member node. And just an example of another, I'm not sure if this particular movie's going to work, but maybe I'll punt. But the idea is that DataOne provides you a set of data from many data archives that you can search and query. And in fact, we've implemented a Python read-only version where you can actually mount the data collective as a file system with full POSIX semantics so that you can actually go through and mount and then do directory search. And the directories would be according to the different tags. So one tag might be keywords you have in your metadata. And so in fact, you can execute a query across the DataOne system as you would just traverse and look through a listing of a directory file system. And this is very useful for many reasons, but in particular, a lot of times you're using COTS software that expects to open a file open dialog and to see a mounted file system and not a web service interface. And so this provides an interface for that. And finally, I have a shameless plug. We've made a proposal for a tutorial at SC11 in Seattle in November for making metadata work for you, a half-day tutorial. We haven't been given the result yet, but we're pretty optimistic that it actually will be accepted. And so, if you're interested, we'd encourage you to come to Seattle. Supercomputing is a great conference. Or if you know others that are interested, just please consider attending or getting the information out. I think I've gone a little over. I apologize.
Any questions for John? Well, I know we got this meeting from different perspectives when we showed SPI means scientific protocol in
Service Programming Interface.
Yeah, which for the out community is a standardized presentation index. So
Well, I had the same problem this morning. PDSI means the Petascale Data Institute, so I'll look that one up.